Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. We see that several of you are starting to trickle in. So as you're trickling in, feel free to get settled in this virtual space. Make yourself aware of this virtual platform and the capabilities that you have access to. You all should be able to interact in the chat. So we encourage you to share with us where you're from in the chat, maybe give any introductions that you would like to give as well, and we will get started shortly. But again, welcome to this afternoon's SACAC webinar. We are so excited for you all to join us today for this timely and insightful conversation that we have in store for you. So we will give it just a few seconds and then we will officially get started. We see some introductions coming in. Thank you for joining us. Okay, awesome. So we are going to go ahead and jump right in. So again, hello everyone. My name is Nayada Schuler and I serve as the chair of the SACAC Webinars Committee and will be assisting behind the scenes with technical support as well as monitoring the Q&A throughout today's webinar. On behalf of SACAC and the Webinars Committee, we would like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Holding Realistic Conversations about Financing and Paying for College from All Sides of the Desk. And so while a college education is undeniably a valuable investment, the path to financing it can often raise concerns for students and families. And so today's webinar is really designed to shine a light on the importance of holding realistic conversations about paying for college from various sides of the desk. During this webinar, our moderator and panelists will explore the realities of financing a college education from multiple perspectives and share practical strategies for navigating the process with clarity and confidence. So a few housekeeping rules, or not rules, notes before we begin. This is a webinar format, so audience mics are muted. We do encourage you to use the chat box to engage with one another and with our panelists. However, we encourage you to use the Q&A box if you have any questions for the panelists. And if time allows, we will have the chance to answer them at the end. This webinar is also being recorded and will be posted later to SACAC's YouTube channel for future viewing. So again, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. And now I will pass things over to our moderator, Jade, to get us started.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jade Domain. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a member of the SACAC Webinar Committee. I also am transitioning into an independent educational consultant role, but have a background in working with students both on the college and high school side at both an independent school and a public charter school. So conversations around cost have always been, really important, a big part of my roles in this admission world. And I am so excited to welcome our panelists, all of whom I've had really robust conversations about cost and affordability in higher education with. So I'm going to go ahead and ask our panelists. We're going to go, I think we'll do alphabetical order by last name. So I'll have you introduce yourself, say your name, the institution you work for, how many years you've been in this profession. And as a fun question, if you could go back in time and give yourself, your college age self, a piece of financial advice, what would that piece of advice be? I know I didn't give that to y'all in advance, so feel free to think about it a little bit. And Tim, I think you're first.
Yes, I had to do the alphabet looking around.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Timothy Fields. I am a Senior Associate Dean of Undergraduate Admission at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I have been there about 20 years. I've been in the profession about, 25. So, very, committed to this work as far as helping people navigate this process, but especially having the conversation surrounding money. And if I had to go back and give myself a bit of advice, it's something we're going to talk a lot about. We even preliminary started talking about before, is being responsible with loans. Just because somebody wants to give you some money as in the form of loans, you don't have to take all of it. You need to be responsible with it. And that's something I wish I would have told myself as opposed to going to Lenox Mall and blowing a whole check.
Thank you, Tim, for that, very pertinent piece of advice. I think that's something that students need to hear a lot. Okay, I think Kelly, I think you're next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Petcavish. I'm at the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee in Nashville, Tennessee. And I've been in this profession for about 15 years now at this point. I've started out on the college side as an admissions counselor for 2 different universities, then went to the high school side as a college counselor, and now I'm on the CBO side as a scholarship coordinator. So kind of have gotten to see all angles of it. Feels really full circle now in the job that I'm in. Timothy stole my advice. So I think what I would say now as my advice is really starting a savings account as a college student, because if you don't take that full loan, that was my mistake in several cases, was taking the full loan, putting some of that money that you don't use in a savings account to have to put towards your student loans later when that first check or first statement comes in that 6 months post graduation that you've got to start paying those student loans. So I think really starting a savings account and putting that money in to start that smart saving as a college student.
Thank you, Kelly. And Anna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Peel. I'm at the New School in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been here for about 5 years, going into my 6th. I've been in this profession for 13 years, public school counselor at a public charter school in New York City, and then back to Atlanta as at a private school. And I think something that I'll probably say more than once today is that the most money you get comes from the college you go to.
I think that's really great. Yeah, I'm always telling students the best bang for your buck is institutional scholarships. So making sure that you're paying attention to those deadlines. Okay, so I thought we should just start with a conversation around FAFSA and kind of what this year has looked like. I know even today we found out that there is going to be a delay with the corrections piece of FAFSA as well. So this has definitely been a headache, and would love to hear a little bit about what that's looked like from you and your capacity and your role. And then what you think we as a collective learned from the 2023-2024 cycle, and how we can better prepare to assist students moving forward with FAFSA and financial aid. So whoever wants to take that one.
I'll go ahead and jump in here very, very quickly. Just at Emory University, a private institution, we were very fortunate to have the CSS profile in which our students could use, which allowed us to not be dependent upon the FAFSA. We weren't delayed in the instance that, we couldn't get financial aid award letters out to our students in a timely fashion. We did not extend our, deposit deadline for our first year class beyond May 1st because we had the CSS profile. With that being said, it does have an effect on other students. So there were students who were saying, yes, I want to consider Emory. However, I also want to consider a public institution somewhere. I want to consider an institution that, is waiting on FAFSA data. So while you all have the May 1st deadline, these institutions have extended it out to June 1st. Will you give me more time? So just in moving forward, just because there are institutions that have the CSS profile can give award data in a timely manner, doesn't mean that the families will have all the information to make a decision as they may be comparing other institutions that do require the FAFSA and are a little bit more dependent upon it.
I think this year reminded me a lot that higher ed is still a business at the end of the day. And I think, a business has to run, it's got to pay its bills. And so I think I want to shout out just all of the counselors who this year worked so hard with students to, used to you be able to sit down with a student. It may take a couple of hours. It may take a follow-up meeting with a parent, but then you could get that FAFSA submitted. In my career of working with students, I really only had one parent that just refused to give their student their financial information to complete a FAFSA. So, there were hurdles, but this year was a massive hurdle. And the counselors who couldn't work with juniors when they typically do because they were still filing FAFSAs And for those counselors who really felt like it was out of their hands to help their students, that was disheartening. And I just want to thank all the counselors who kept pounding at it and trying to find an answer. But I think what concerns me, I think about this year, is the distrust in a government organization that has been, that's impacted all of our families. And I think what really breaks my heart is we're so focused on this incoming freshman class, but I've been working with so many sophomores, juniors, and seniors who are currently in college who still haven't been able to submit a FAFSA because they don't maybe have that trust in someone on their college campus to walk them through the process. And I'm worried about those students we're going to lose in college, and worried about the student debt they may have already taken out and different things that they potentially will have to pay back without even finishing a degree. So I think as many organizations that cannot rely on a FAFSA anymore, the better off we will be. As a scholarship provider, we took out the FAFSA as a part of our process this year and use other methods to determine financial need, because it is absolutely heartbreaking for students to not be able to make a financial decision this big with every piece of info they need, like Timothy said.
Kelly, I appreciate that you mentioned that piece around distrust. I think a lot of us are constantly trying to encourage students to fill out FAFSA, and this was a particularly difficult year where, you know, we're telling students and families, like, we think it's important, it's a free application, but they're experiencing all these hurdles. So that part makes it a little bit more challenging. And Tim, I appreciate that you spoke to the fact that Emory is a CSS profile school. There could be a perception, and maybe for many students, you know, the CSS profile, you know, was sufficient, but the fact that students, we want them to be able to make smart decisions and compare their options, and so that caused some limitations. Anna, I would love for you, if you could speak a little bit to, having worked with students, I'm sure, who were kind of dependent on FAFSA information for some of their schools, what that looked like, and what you saw working with them. If you saw trends of students kind of being like, okay, well, I'm just going to look at my CSS profile schools at this point and make a decision, or if students, you know, were making, if you feel like they were maybe making information without all of them, or making decisions without all of the information. At least those were the concerns that I had with my students. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to what it looked like working with students who were applying with FAFSA.
You took the words out on it. That's exactly what I wanted to share. So I would say that especially this year, the students at my school tended to apply to more CSS profile schools. And at the new school, most of our students do receive some type of financial aid in order to go here, even though we are a private school. So there is a great amount of need. Most students in the end did choose CSS profile schools, and they didn't have to worry. They didn't, you know, the FAFSA was a last thought, like, hey, that's not really going to help me out this year, so I'm not going to use it. Where it did come in handy, for example, I had one student who could not get their FAFSA, like they kept submitting and there was always something wrong, obviously, this year. And finally, in the end, they didn't get enough to go to a private school, so they did choose an in-state school in Georgia, and they used their FAFSA. But you know, like I said at the beginning, the most money you get comes from the schools you go to. And something else important that I learned this year, so forever I've worked with students who, you know, if they apply, they get money based on need to a lot of their schools, so they're only taking out $5,000 in loans. Well, this year I had a student who, I guess, you know, I didn't know all of the financials, and at the end of the day, he was accepted to a lot of highly selective schools. But one thing I didn't know that I wish I had known is that I should have also added merit-based schools to his list. More merit-based schools, like smaller schools that would have given him money based off merit that didn't even need to see the FAFSA. So.
And a quick follow-up question. Are there certain schools that you would want to shout out? That I think that's something that counselors on the call would love to appreciate, that you've seen have offered really strong merit packages?
Yeah, and you know, anybody can email me. I love sharing my list. But Muhlenberg, Earlham, Agnes Scott, what else? Goucher, Skidmore, Connecticut College, very generous. I mean, the list goes on, but I've got, if you want to know which schools those are, look on the CSS profile,
Awesome.
right? So,
Thank
yeah.
Oh, sorry, keep going.
No, I think those are some of them, but I love sharing that information. So please, if people want to reach out to me, I'd love to share my lists.
Awesome. Thank you. So we had a question in the chat that I thought would be great to kind of elevate. So, at Agnes Scott, we used to, when I worked in the admission office at Agnes Scott for 6 years, we did a lot of financial aid counseling. And we would always talk about how important it is to have a 4-year plan, not to just have a 1-year plan, but to really kind of have a 4-year financial plan for this investment. And I thought that was kind of related to this question. So what do you do if a family just saved very little, like we're in a place where they weren't able to save, much for the college education? What suggestions do you have other than that they go to a 2-year college and then transfer to a 4-year institution? What are some other strategies that you would offer for students?
Jade, I'd love to hop in here. My career on the high school side was mainly working with low income students. About 90% of my class each year was like free and reduced lunch students. So I think also just reframing what it means to go to a exciting college, right? I think like we paint such a picture that you can only go to these 5 colleges and be successful. And that's just not the case. I have so many students that go to our public schools here in Tennessee and thrive and graduate debt free. So I think it's all too about painting a picture of what success looks like for your student body. And, we had a couple of students, one of my years I was there, we had our first student ever get into Vanderbilt, and we celebrated that just as much as we did every single one of our kids that was going to community college for free for 2 years through the Tennessee Promise program. So I truly believe that's more of a school culture environment of like making sure you get to know your students to celebrate each one of them. I was a student. My parents were public school teachers. I had no money to go to college. And I went to a public 4-year institution here in the state of Tennessee and absolutely loved my experience. So I think just really framing that positive culture and knowing your parents and families that you're working with so you can appropriately celebrate all your students.
Timothy, you want to add?
No, please go ahead.
One thing that, piggybacking off of what Kelly said, so starting at the beginning of junior year, whether that's, having a financial aid expert come in. I've had people from Emory come, I've had people from Georgia Student Finance come, which is great. And then telling them what you want them to tell the parents. So one thing I have them say to the parents that I want them to hear is, part of your fit is financial fit. You might love a campus, but can you afford it? And telling them that early and often so that you can kind of put the brakes on that and not have to mention that as much later is really helpful. And I think having those financial aid nights as a whole is really helpful too.
And the only thing that I will add is kind of piggybacking on, what Anna just said, that, one of the first conversations long before you even, start looking at colleges, let's have a conversation about money. Let's have a conversation about how much we have saved, how much we plan to invest. And then based upon that, then begin to build out a list. One of the hardest conversations that I've had to have at Emory, a student came and visited, was part of our fly-in program, fell in love with Emory and wanted to come. And then the mother called and says, hey, my son really loves it. We're trying to make this work. We're trying to see if we can take out a second mortgage. And I immediately said, stop. You do not need to go to that length in order to invest in a college. If you have to go to that length, then this is not the college for you. There are other colleges and universities that will give you a significant amount of money that will be affordable within your family, but you do not need to go into retirement. You do not need to go into second mortgages. You don't need to take Parent Plus loans. When it gets to that level of needing money, that's when there needs to be a serious conversation. But it has to happen at first. Like, you know, if you as a parent, you cannot just turn it over to your student and say, hey, it's their life. They're going to make their college list. That is not fair to them, because ultimately it is a family decision and money should be at the forefront of that before you even get to the other parts that often people prioritize. But if you don't have conversation about money up front, it's going to make the conversation a little bit more difficult than it needs to be.
Sorry,
Yeah.
can I?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Can I add one thing? One thing I started doing last year that was really helpful. At my last school, I collected everybody's taxes because we did all their FAFSAs with them on Saturday. But one thing I've been doing now is once I get to know the students, when I'm sitting with the parents, I'll write down a number and I'll show it to them. I'll say, is this kind of what you think you can afford? And they'll say, oh yeah. Or they'll say, no, it's I can afford a little more than that. But just putting it down, writing it down without saying it out loud takes the pressure off of them.
I started within my last couple of years at Agnes Scott, I started asking students, we would do the math together and we would come up with that number. And then I would say, does this sound like an affordable amount for you and your family? And at first I felt like that sounded really like blunt, but I feel like sometimes they had to, again, like see the numbers and know like, this is what's going to be on your bill this fall. Because even me as an adult, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, that seems totally, affordable, but you have to kind of have that reality check with yourself. And so I do think that's a really nice strategy. Okay, so another question that I have, and I think this is kind of related to what we were talking about. I think there's just a lot of misinformation out there around the college process in general, but especially around financing college. And I'm wondering if you can share some pervasive myths that you just wish you could eliminate. Like if anyone has like something where you're like, that is said all the time, and I just wish that would get out of people's conversations. And on the flip side, if there's any information out there that you're like, this is really valuable information, I wish every single student and family and supporter knew about this information. So something that you wish would be eliminated and something that you wish that everyone would know would be more common knowledge.
I think what I wish that like people would stop doing is comparing their situation with other people they know. I do think that's helpful in some scenarios, but in the schools that I've worked in, I mainly had very large, like Egyptian, Coptic Christian populations, Hispanic, African American. And because their trust is so in their community, they take their advice from their peers and people who've gone to school, which that is reliable. There's nothing wrong with that. However, a lot of the times you don't have the same financial situation, or you may assume someone has the same financial situation as you. And so I think like if we could just really instill in students, you need to talk to a college admissions professional before you make an assumption. I had so many students say, I can't apply to that school, or I can't afford that school because like everybody else has told me I can't do that. So I think just breaking down some of those narratives, which is hard because they're coming from communities that they've had to trust to survive and thrive in our nation. And so I think just really encouraging students. I had to look at one of my students one point and say, well, are they a college admissions professional or college counselor? And they were like, no, they're a student my age. And I was like, then why are you listening to them? Talk to your counselor. So I think that's something I would really love to break through. It's just that every student situation is different, and really talk to someone before you just assume something. I'll have to think of the one to share with everybody, the positive one.
So how long do I have? So I would, the first thing I want to say is that public schools out of state are not necessarily cheaper. Public schools in state are not necessarily cheaper or less expensive than a private school. Never, ever believe that. The second, like I said before, the most money you get comes from the college you go to. And then the third is there's a big difference between a community foundation of Tennessee that Kelly works for, which is a scholarship foundation, and applying for hundreds of millions of little scholarships. And I think there's this there's this belief often around, "Oh, if I could just apply, can I get a different scholarship every day to apply for?" But you look at this poor child who's applying for all of these scholarships, they're not receiving any of them, and they're wasting all their time. And then you look at the schools they're applying to that don't give any money, and then they just feel completely defeated. But if you just change their list a little bit and you added some schools on there that actually are going to see them through, or you set them up with a scholarship program like Kelly's that will see them through college, it will make a world of a difference.
And what I would add to the conversation is I just would like to normalize the idea that everybody is going to pay some amount for college. That this idea that there are full rides, that I can't go to college unless it's completely paid for the most part, is a farce. That most people are going to have to pay for college in some form or fashion. Even if you do receive a full scholarship, you probably should arrive on that college campus with $1,000 in your pocket for books, for spending on getting things set up. So just kind of as you're having the discussions with families, and we'll probably talk about loans a little bit later. Just the idea that you are going to have some investment as a family. Part of the new FAFSA is the student aid index. It's going to say there's some amount of money that more than likely you are going to have to pay. So going into this process saying we're only going to go to schools that we don't have to pay nothing is not realistic. On the other end, something that we've alluded to, that, and I think sometimes we have to just be very clear that there are 4,000 colleges and universities throughout this country, and a lot of them offer great financial aid. A lot of them have very high admit rates, and so we just have to move beyond saying there are only 50, 75 schools that we can apply to that may or may not offer a lot of financial aid, and really kind of build out a list, thinking of the things that we've talked about as, how much money do I want to pay? How far do I want to go away? What type of environment am I looking at? And thinking about that, because a lot of times people complain about not getting financial aid packages, but everybody's applying to the same 50, 60 institutions.
I want to ask Timothy, as someone who works in admissions, isn't it considered a full ride if you have to take out $5,000 to $10,000 in loans? Often, don't schools sometimes consider that a full ride?
There are some schools, and we don't have enough time to get into the jargon that various schools use. Some will say, oh, we feel we covered all of your cost, but to Anna's point, part of covering that cost was saying we're going to give you $10,000 in loans. And then also I think just some schools will say, hey, this is institutional aid. Some schools will call it a scholarship, and then parents will say, oh, my child got a scholarship, when in fact that's just money that the school was going to give you. They're just using a jargon to kind of appeal to you. So just understanding the jargon, looking at the financial aid packages are very, very important. Thank you for bringing that up, Anna.
I want to thank Anna for the shout out for the Community Foundation scholarships. I think that's like a really positive piece of financial aid that many people aren't aware of, and I wasn't aware of when I was going through the college process. I'm at a community foundation. There are hundreds across the nation, and a lot of them do scholarships, and they're set up by donors in that area to benefit students who reside in that area. So I think the point Anna was kind of really getting at is the investment of time of students filling out our application versus a lot of these other bigger national scholarships that they're competing against thousands of other students. Their likelihood of getting a local scholarship from their own neighborhood community foundation is higher. So just really working smarter, not harder, about applying for that additional aid too.
Speaking of which, we got a question in the chat for knowing that school counselors are swamped. What are some free, reduced cost, or regular cost resources to obtain college financing? Sorry, I lost the question. College planning and financial services and advice.
I'll build off that just really quickly. If your community foundation offers scholarships, typically the person running the program has a financial aid background, and they will go and do scholarship and financial aid sessions. I do those all throughout Middle Tennessee. I was just on a Zoom with Dr. Stephanie Young at the Chattanooga Foundation the other day. She does the same. So I think that's not only a great resource for scholarships, but also a free resource to come in and talk to your students. Because, you know, they don't always listen to you, but if some stranger shows up and tells them, they may listen to them.
Yeah, I liked Anna's strategy of ask them to tell them what you want them to hear. I think that's a good strategy, right? Like they'll hear it from you. So these are the things that we want you to say.
I want to add three helpful resources. Number one, like I said earlier, like if you're in Georgia Student Finance Commission, each state has their own finance commission, and they're free, and they will come and speak to your school. The other piece is reaching out to financial aid departments at colleges that are near you. I found that to be so helpful. And then the third, several years ago, I had a student, and Jade worked at Agnes Scott at that point and sat down and went through the entire financial aid package. And I'll never forget it. And so just asking, you know, the financial aid office at the college they want to go to, or asking their admission counselor to go through it with you. Those are 3 free resources.
I'll just add a couple very quickly. Big Futures through College Board is a great resource. My Scholarly, MySchoolly.com. Obviously, you know, the Princeton Review, niche.com. Sally Mae, while, you know, it does have loans, they also have scholarships that they offer. ScholarshipAmerica.org is a very large scholarship organization that, you know, found out that most of the scholarships they have, you know, go unawarded. So those are just a couple of resources that you can, you know, use to kind of provide information for your students on top of what's already been shared.
Tim, since you just mentioned loans, I thought it made sense for us to have a conversation around loans as well. And anyone can take this question, but how do you address conversations with students and families about student loans when they're either hesitant about borrowing, or on the other hand, maybe they're very, very open to borrowing and you're concerned about the kind of amount that they're borrowing? So what are some of the, I guess, conversations that you're having with students and families?
Yeah, so I'll just start by saying that loan isn't a bad 4-letter word. I think, you know, depending upon, you know, what your financial aid situation is, how much you want to invest, how your family wants to go about this process, I think, you know, loans present an opportunity. So, you know, I think the first thing, and we already kind of talked about it, has to be, you know, in a responsible way. Like, you know, somebody could offer you $5,000, but you only may need 1,000. So just take the 1,000. But you know, I give the example of a place like Emory. The total cost of to Emory is $80,000. You multiply that over 4 years, it's well over $300,000. And there might be a student or family that says, you know, Emory has been our dream. You've done everything that you could to get into Emory, and then Emory provides, you know, a financial aid package. And you know, in order to make that work, you might have to take out $10,000 in loans per year. And so, you know, not the average loan isn't $40,000, but I'll just, to round a number, $40,000. I think most people would say, if I give you $280,000 and all you have to do is invest $40,000, that's a good investment. And so I like for people to think of it more as an investment, and then you think about what are going to be your life learnings, your lifetime earnings over your life. And if Emory is a place that you feel can, you know, help you on that road, and you made that investment that you'll make far more of your lifetime earnings, then that's something to think about. But it is something that to not immediately kind of dismiss the idea of loans, because there may be the perfect institution that you love. And if there's a small amount of loans you could take out in a responsible way to make that, you know, educational reality, I think that is something that families should think about.
I like what Timothy said earlier too about, like, everyone's going to have to pay a little bit of something to go to college. It's just, that's what is going to happen. And so if that means you take out $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 in loans every year, it's not going to be the end of the world. And I think we're working with a group right now that is so scared of loans, rightfully so, because of what's in the media, what's been going on. But again, borrowing smartly versus just like borrowing to borrow. But I think that also, that has to come from getting to know the family. And I think one thing that's really important is you're not just going to sit down with a family one day and say, okay, let's talk about your financial situation. Like, I don't even really like talking about my budget with my parents. So like, that's not going to happen overnight. And I think from a counselor in a school system, that means going to the basketball games. That means going to the homecoming events. That means like students seeing you and trusting you and knowing this is the person I have these conversations with. But then I think it's also kind of what you said earlier, Jade. I think it's also having those blunt conversations. I'll never forget, I had a student who wanted to go to a school. She was going to have to take out like $20,000 in loans every year to go. Her mother made like $35,000 a year. And I was like, sweetheart, you're taking out more than half of your mother's income a year. And did a comparison for her wanting to take out $20,000. I had recently bought a car. I showed her how much my monthly payment was. So I think just like getting to know students, getting to have that real world examples with them, show them that you're human too, and like how you budget and decisions you make. The more conversations you can have like that, to be blunt and real, the more parents are going to trust you to then navigate making that decision for their student or guardians, whoever it may be. But you just can't expect one day to sit down with a family and say, let's talk about loans. It's just not going to happen.
I appreciate the kind of trust building piece of the conversation. There are a lot of kind of questions in the chat that are around, I guess, how to have some of these more sensitive conversations. I think the reality is, parents really want to feel like they can do, the best for their children, and sometimes when they aren't able to save to the point that the kid can go to the school that they want to go to, that feels very, very personal. And so I think that there are questions in the chat around like how to kind of navigate those conversations with families when they're not wanting to be maybe particularly forthcoming about their financial situation. I think we've all talked about the importance of having those conversations early, but the reality is that whether we like it or not, money can feel like a very taboo conversation, not just in the financial aid process, but beyond. And then certainly there might be, someone mentioned in the chat, like stigmas around things like loans, especially maybe around first generation college students and things like that. So I'm wondering if there are any other kind of thoughts that panelists want to share about having some of those more being, I guess, like culturally sensitive and being kind of aware of the sensitivity around cost and budgeting and things like that.
I want to give 2 examples that I think maybe will be helpful. So the student that I mentioned earlier, who I, didn't know that the parents had actually a lot of savings, and that's why he wasn't getting money from colleges. I finally called, I was calling the financial aid offices, and one of the financial aid officers said, well, you may not know everything. And I was like, oh, okay, let me go back. And so I went back and I asked them, I said, you have to tell me honestly. And they, within 5 minutes, they sent me back a detailed list of everything they had in their savings account. So I think sometimes just, really asking with a straight face can be helpful. The second scenario this year, I had a student who really wanted to go to BU. And they had a lot of other options. The other option was Smith. That's another school that's super generous, Smith College. And so what I said to the student, so they only had to take out $9,000 in loans, and Smith told me that they want their students to have some loans because they want them to have some ownership in their college. If they don't have any ownership, then they're not going to be as connected, is their feeling on this. And so what I said to the student, I found all the numbers. So this Smith's endowment, I think, is $2.5 billion. And they only have 2,200 students. BU has an endowment of $3 billion, but they have 25,000 students. And so I showed those numbers and she immediately made her decision. Because, that's the kind of thing where, if you're looking at the money, if you need a pair of glasses, that school can provide it for you. If you need a train ticket, maybe they can help you. Sorry, I'm going a little off topic, but, going back to the question, I think, and it's really hard for me, but just asking them with a really straight face, like, what can you afford? How much are you willing to take out? And not sugarcoating it,
But I also think, Anna, just to kind of add to that, I think we have to remember too, it's our job to facilitate the conversation, not to lead the conversation. And so I think like empowering students, I always joke in a presentation I do for kids, like I knew when I came home from school when I was younger, if my mom already had a glass of wine out on the table, I didn't talk to her. I went to my room, did my homework, and left her alone. So like know when to have these conversations with your parents, like be very intentional about it. This is your first like big step as an adult. And so like what a great environment to practice that while you're still at home with your parents or guardians, and have that conversation and say, hey, I'm starting to look at colleges. Can we set up some time to talk about what this looks like for me? And I think also reminding parents, I'll never forget, I had a mom call me one time just in tears, and she said, I feel like I have failed my student. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And I said, how have you failed? You were the mother. Like that's your job, is to be the mother. You then reach out to other people to get their expertise. You're not supposed to have all the expertise. That's not your job. Your job is to know your kid and support them. So I think like empowering our students early in the game to start to have some of these conversations with their parents, if that's in a personal finance class where they role play with a peer, whatever that may be, just having some of those experiences early on. So as the counselor, you're truly facilitating that conversation and not leading it. I think that's a big assistance to in navigating that.
I think, yeah, the importance of like, I guess, knowing our roles in this. I think something I constantly have to remind myself is ultimately this is a family decision, and it's not, all I can do is give my advice and base it on expertise. But I can't make the decision for them. And oftentimes, students and families make decisions that maybe I wouldn't have. But it is ultimately their decision and their place to do that. Okay, I had a question. I'm actually really curious about this. So in kind of toward the beginning of this conversation, when we did our introductions, everyone spoke a little bit to how long they've been in this profession. And so something I'm curious about is how conversations regarding cost and affordability have evolved throughout your professional career that can be on a local level, an institutional level, or even on a national level. And how have your conversations then and the way you talk about cost evolved as a response to those changes?
Yeah, so what I'll say is, throughout my entire professional career, I started off at a 2-year institution, Atlanta Metropolitan College. And so, costs, really centered around if you're Pell eligible, more than likely that's going to cover everything. For that population, it was like, how much money am I going to get back? And then, as, moved on to Emory, the conversation, around cost became more transactional. Given the population as far as a negotiation, like, hey, I see you gave me this financial aid package, but this other institution gave me this, you gave me this, how much more can you give me? And it became more of a bartering, system, which, depending upon institutions, there may be a certain level of flexibility that they may have. But I just noticed, from where I sit at Emory, and I'll acknowledge the privilege of being at a place like that, endowment, financial aid, and other things, people who apply are much, by and large are much more, oh, you gave me this, can I get a little bit more? As opposed to, just saying, oh, this is a great opportunity for education, we'll make it work. So over the years, and then a lot of this is driven by the cost of higher education. It goes up. So, people see it and they're like, okay, can I get more? Are there scholarships? What else is there? So it's become a lot more transactional from my experience based upon those two examples that I shared.
I think the thing I've learned most over my career is even though we have been put in these situations to learn these things and be such a valued resource for students, I'm saying this as a white woman who has a very thick Southern accent, who worked at a school where I had like one white student graduate the whole time I was there. I'm not going to have as effective conversations with some of those students as someone who A, looks like them, and B, speaks the same language as them. And so really leaning on your community. When I was at the school I was at, Fisk was right down the road. TSU was right down the road. So using those people to come in and do financial presentations. We had an amazing group called Conexion Americas here in the Nashville area that works with undocumented students, also just like first generation Latino students going to college. So pulling as many of those resources as I could into our school. Also like just being really strategic and not calling FAFSA night because not every kid can submit a FAFSA. So calling it financial aid night and having Conexion there to help my students who were undocumented still feel like they were checking something off of their list to be able to make a financial decision to go to college. So I think just like we all really want to be this resource for everybody, and that's such a great feeling, but then also knowing that there are just going to be some situations where families feel more comfortable talking to someone else and taking our ego out of that situation and being okay with it.
I love what you said, Kelly. I think one of the hardest lessons I learned is, like you said, facilitating conversations that, you may not have the answer, but you might have to find the right person. A few years ago when I was a counselor in New York City, most of my students were either from Jamaica or from Haiti. And I knew that the counselor at Hobart and William Smith was from Haiti. So I brought her in. She just said hi. And there were 10 parents at her table. And 5 of those students ended up going together to that school and got full rides, meaning they were still paying $5,000 a year in loans. And I think, yeah, that's been really hard. The other piece of it is adding to their list, never telling them, no, you can't apply there. No, you can't. I think that is so important because you never know where you're going to get in. You never know where they're going to get in or how much money they're going to get. So adding to never taking that dream away, I think it's important too.
So there was a question in the chat that I think Tim and Anna, y'all can probably speak a little bit to this through your rules. Kelly, if you have input, please feel free to. But it was a specific question about the non-custodial parent waiver on the CSS profile. I actually had a student this year applying to Emory and had to do that process for Emory specifically. But if y'all can speak a little bit to kind of what that process looks like, and then any outcomes that you've had with that as well. And for the person who put this in the chat, I've done this with a few students, so also we can connect at any point if you wanted to email me about that.
Yeah, so I'll just say that, the non-custodial waiver is essentially a form that if there is a parent or guardian who, is not present, the other parent or guardian has to, complete this, or there has to be somebody from this community to, basically say that this person is not present in their life. What a lot of the CSS profile schools, majority are private, are giving away significant amount of institutional aid, want to make sure if we are going to give a student $70,000, $80,000, that, that is money that is going towards their education because of their financial situation, not because two parents are no longer together, one doesn't like the other, and so they're going to say, we don't want to include that because we think we're going to get no more money. It is, really for instances where unfortunately somebody, may have passed away. Somebody may be incarcerated. There's are situations to where this person literally does not, is not part of the student's life and in no way, form, or fashion. And so in those instances, we just need some type of documentation to share that that is in fact the case, so that we're not going to request that information, because in the instance that this person is alive, this person is involved in their life, this person is paying child support, this person is, has some connection to the student, we're going to need the information because, we are not trying to be nosy. We're not trying to be judgmental. All we want to know is how much money is available to support this student's education so we can give the best financial aid possible. And we just want to get all the information we can to make that assessment. In the case that's not the instance, you complete this form. Once we, verify, okay, that is in fact the instance, then we will only use the information that we have to go about making decisions. And I can say, our financial aid, department has been, very, kind of very understanding, knowing the dynamics of certain type of populations and certain students, and not trying to go too deep, but saying, okay, if this is what you're going to present it, we're going to take you at face value and we're going to get you a financial aid package as soon as possible so that you can make your college decision.
I think in addition, what I've found helpful is, if I have this with a student, I'll put like a reminder a month out to check back with it so I can make sure that it went through. And, I just keep writing letters. Like, this student hasn't received a birthday card in 7 years. The last time they spoke to their parent on the phone was 9 years ago. I've even turned in like parents' pay stubs that were little pieces of paper that had writing on them. So I think any information that you can gather and you just keep checking. I think that's the key. So.
Hey, Jade.
Yeah.
I did see Leah's question above that, and I forgot to mention this earlier and wanted to add this. She talked about getting students to complete a FAFSA and having that information on record. I used to do that for all my students. Any of my students that filed a FAFSA, I strongly encourage them to write down their FSA ID and their EFC. This was back in the day, and their parents' info, because what I experienced too, and the way I was able to convince them, Leah, was that so many of my siblings went to the same schools. And so I would say, you're going to not only have to do this for your student next year, but you're going to also have to do it for a sibling. And I don't know about y'all, but I forget password all the time on all my accounts. And we don't want you to have to go through that. We want you to get it done in one night. So if you sign this paper with your FSA ID and your EFC, we'll have that on file to remember if your student ever were to need it throughout their journey. Now, I did also, just as a protection, put on that piece of paper and have the parents sign it, was that I was not a tax professional. I was a college counselor on the high school side. And so that they couldn't hold me liable for anything that were to happen. But I kept all of that in a Google Sheet. And then that way, once my kids were alumni and were in college, like clockwork, every year they would email me, Miss P, do you remember my FSA ID? I need to log in to do my FAFSA. And we always hosted our alumni at that same event with our current students filling out a FAFSA. So then that way, like, they were all together with their siblings and friends and felt like they were coming back home to get that support, to get that completed. So I think that's just saying, I'm keeping this so you won't forget it next year, usually wins people over.
Okay. I wanted to know, so I think something that we are really trying to encourage students to think about is not just thinking of the cost of attendance as tuition, but seeing that the cost of attendance includes a lot more, including sometimes a plane ticket to get where you need to go, right? And books and all of these other pieces. What are your strategies in ensuring that students and families or supporters see the entire cost of attendance and understand it? and budget for it.
I think just showing them examples. I mean, I'll never forget, I did a presentation a couple years ago and showed a financial aid package from a college and just kind of showed it and said, how much are you going to owe? And then I showed them, I was like, wait, guys, do y'all not see that they included loans in like your financial, like your money you're getting from the college? And they were like, oh my gosh, like they were ticked off. And they were like, everybody start pulling up your financial aid letters from your college. And it was like a hunt. They were looking to be like, how did they present this information to us? And we got in this whole discussion about how we need legislation to like unify, get that uniformed from each college. But I think just being honest with them and showing them, and I think having some of your alumni come in and have some of those conversations, I think they respect us, but also they respect their peers so much more and take what their peers say for truth. And so I think as often as you can get alumni in your building to have those conversations by pulling up their actual like financial aid packages is really helpful to students.
I would just say, I think, on, financial aid nights or, on any, kind of information that you send out, to have a glossary of terms, direct costs, indirect costs, loans, grants, all those individual terms that we may take for granted, as well as having an example financial aid award letter, marking out the student's name, but having all of those individual, items. And then I think it's, very important that, you have conversations that, depending upon the financial aid package, the type of school, that, yeah, there might be some, money that's available for flight, but then how do you actually get that? I mean, a lot of these, families that we work with, just got an email the other day. Hey, first generation student, I'm excited about coming to Emory. Is there money to fly out my mom and my two sisters as they want to be part of this process? And so while that's not directly a part of the financial aid package, that might be something that, we could possibly do. But so I think it's very important to like kind of, have the glossary of terms so that people understand it, because too often what I find is the conversations we have inside the bubble, the admission financial aid bubble, terms that we think we understand, that, we take for granted. A lot of people that are just, first time going through this process don't know what those terms mean.
Jade, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I'm surprised that it only happened once during this whole conversation. Well, thank you all so much for all of your expertise. I really appreciate your time. I think that's all the time that we have for questions. But if we didn't get to one of your questions, please feel free to reach out to one of us, and I'm happy to kind of extend this very important conversation. And I want to invite Niadi back to close us out.
Perfect. Thank you so much to our exceptional moderator, our panelists. You all couldn't see me in the background taking notes and like nodding my head in agreement. So this clearly was such an insightful discussion, and one that I believe many of our peers in the audience will walk away from with some key takeaways as well. So again, thank you all to our panelists, our moderator. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. From here, please be on the lookout for SACAC announcements about upcoming webinars coming soon. And in the meantime, have a great day.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.